share. All right. So again, tomorrow's quiz is going to be chapter 17. So that's what we did last Thursday, 18, 19, and 20. Not whatever we do tomorrow. So let's go back over 19 a little bit. We're going to find Staphylococcus throughout the entire skin. Keep in mind that the skin is the largest organ in the body, so therefore we have a lot of Staphylococcus on our bodies. That is important. Somebody describe a sebaceous site, maybe where it is or a characteristic of it.
Oily.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's oily.
Yeah, so an oily site. So give me one example. Face or back. So those are sebaceous sites. So you're going to find staph and then the causal agent of acne, P. acnes. Moist sites like armpits, groin. You're going to find staph and Corynebacterium. We're going to see one example of this organism later today. And then dry sites like the extremities, so the forearms, thighs, legs. Those are going to be your dry sites, and you're going to find some gram-negative organisms here.
What was moist sites again?
Moist sites are going to be like the groin, armpits, think like sweaty areas. But big point here is staph is everywhere. So again, the question that you should expect to see for tomorrow would be something on the lines of, which of the following sites would you expect to find Staphylococcus? Sebaceous, dry, moist, all of the above. You'd choose all of the above. And again, just thinking about the quizzes, the exams, whenever you see my questions, if you see all of the above or none of the above, don't think that that has to be the correct answer, okay? Sometimes I'll give you that as the correct answer, sometimes I'll give you that as an option. Don't be misled. All right, so a localized kind of inflamed region caused by staph, we could call an abscess. It's got pus in it. If it's painful and red, we call it a boil. The scientific name for a boil is a furuncle. This image here, 1908, shows a collection of them. We'll call a bunch of furuncles, a bunch of boils, together a carbuncle. I don't know anybody who's had this, but it doesn't look very comfortable. And how about impetigo? Do you all remember what that one is? Symptoms? You're going to get these kind of thin blisters. You're going to have some yellow fluid come out, and it's going to crust over. And then, so this top image here, this is impetigo. Then we can also have some exotoxins that can cause either the scalded skin syndrome or toxic shock syndrome. Scalded skin, you're going to end up with kind of sandpapery, dry skin that can crack. And I believe that was Staph aureus that causes this. And toxic shock syndrome, again, can come from tattooing or improper tampon use. But you guys, if you all don't know about that, spend a little bit of time and learn something. All right, we talked about group A strep being the ones that you all are probably going to encounter in the hospital setting. So we can take our streptococcal infectious agents, bacterial pathogens, and split them into their ability to break open red blood cells, called hemolysis. Do you all remember what color alpha hemolytic strep are going to turn blood agar? What is it? That's going to be beta. Good try. It's going to be kind of like a green color. Incomplete hemolysis is what I want you to think. So they can break open red blood cells, but they're not really, really efficient at it. That's going to be your beta hemolytic strains. They're going to destroy red blood cells, and so instead of red, we're going to see a clearing zone. And keep in mind that what bacteria are after is probably going to be iron and hemoglobin. And then we can also base these streptococcal species based on their outer cell wall carbohydrates, so their sugars. And so that's where we get group A and group B. But again, I have the group A highlight because that's what you are going to encounter. They're going to cause things like strep throat, which we'll talk about today, cellulitis, which is a skin infection caused by some sort of a laceration to the skin surface. So you're cutting yourself when you're shaving, for example. Erysipelas, that one, that is a special type of cellulitis that occurs in young people and older adults. Toxic shock, this terrible image here of necrotizing fasciitis, that's where the muscle tissue and the connective tissue called the fascia are consumed by bacteria. Cold sores, I want you to think herpes simplex virus 1, HSV1. Genital sores is going to be HSV2. 90% of the adult population has HSV1. Again, just to avoid stigmatizing cold sores, like everybody gets these things, it happens. And if you have one and you don't want somebody to see it, put on a face mask, even post-pandemic. And so these are going to reemerge during stressful times, so the bacteria can sense some sort of stress in your body, and that's when they will reemerge to the skin surface and cause a cold sore. Cold sores are contagious. Don't be kissing people with cold sores unless you want their HSV1. Chickenpox is caused by varicella zoster virus. There's a vaccine available. So if kids touch each other or breathe in respiratory droplets, they can be transmitted this way. We're going to see that all day today with the respiratory infections. Respiratory droplets, aerosolized particles, and skin-to-skin contact, or fomite contact. And so this Rye syndrome, we're also going to see this again today. Excuse me, if caretakers, give children with chickenpox aspirin. Aspirin contains a compound called salicylate, and children can develop some sort of a reaction to that. That's Rye syndrome. It's very uncommon, but kids can be sensitive to certain drugs. Shingles is caused by the same virus, VZV. It's very painful, feels like an ice pick, and it can come back again and again. And then even after these bumps go away, people can still be left with what's called neuralgia or nerve damage. People with measles get spots called Koplik spots inside of their mouths. They're going to have little white bumps on the tips of them. It's going to be a very early symptom. They get these red bumps. They're going to start at the hairline and spread through the whole body. And so measles, mumps, and rubella are given as a single dose vaccine together. It's an image of a young boy with smallpox. Somebody tell me who developed the first smallpox vaccine?
Was it Jenner?
Edward Jenner, that's right. And keep in mind, he took the idea from Chinese medicine that was using ground up smallpox scabs and inhaling them, called variolation. Smallpox is known as variolation. Just kind of put it all together. And so after these bumps heal, they can be left with these deep pitted scars known as pox. Pink eye can be caused by bacteria or viruses. We're going to call an eye infection conjunctivitis. It could also be caused by chlamydia. We'd call that trachoma. The sexually transmitted chlamydia is called chlamydia trachomatis. So think trachoma, chlamydia, eye infection. You can also get viral pink eye. And this is an image of trachoma. Again, keep in mind that's where the inner part of the eyelid can be inflamed, and even starting to touch my eyes, flip inside out, and then the eyelashes can cause some scratches on the cornea, so the surface of the eye. So all around, just terribly painful, terribly uncomfortable. All right, questions over that? Pretty straightforward? Yeah, cool. Y'all seem to be doing a little bit better now that we've been doing these reviews. All right, so let's talk about respiratory system. This isn't in your book, but they mentioned the upper and lower respiratory tract, so I just wanted to throw this image up here. So think of right about here in the middle of your neck as the cutoff between the upper and the lower respiratory tract. So the upper respiratory tract is going to be the nose. I'm going to go ahead and include the mouth in there as well. You can say the mouth is a part of the digestive tract, but the back of the mouth meets the nose, the nasal cavity, at a location called the pharynx. Below the pharynx is going to be the larynx, and that's our cutoff. So larynx is right about here. Below that is your windpipe, known as the trachea. That's going to be the start of the lower respiratory tract. Trachea goes down and splits into two large tubes called bronchi. Those are going to go into each of the lungs, the right and the left. So one bronchus, singular, goes into each lung. Those further divide into smaller tubes, smaller channels called bronchioles. You all have heard of arteries, maybe arterioles. Arterioles are smaller than arteries. Bronchioles are smaller than bronchi. And then, at the end of our bronchioles, pardon me, we have what's called a terminal bronchiole, leading to a respiratory bronchiole. That's where you're going to find the alveoli. That's important. Again, this isn't an anatomy class, but in the alveoli, this is where gas exchange is going to take place. So these are little pockets that are surrounded by capillaries. This is how we get oxygen everywhere in our body and get CO2 out of our red blood cells in the alveoli. All right, so that's just an introduction to the upper and the lower. In the upper respiratory tract, we're going to find Resident Microbiota. So we have some microbes that can help outcompete invading microbes. And we can get rid of certain invaders through a process called mucociliary clearance. Muco referring to mucus, ciliary referring to cilia, and then clearance meaning like expulsion out of the body. There's a certain type of cell called a goblet cell that will produce and secrete mucus. We're all familiar with mucus. So mucus can trap invading infectious agents. And then the cilia, think these little finger-like appendages. And they're going to move that mucus up out of the respiratory tract so that you can, I was about to just kind of cough, but that's probably not the best thing during a pandemic. You can expel that invader trapped in mucus. If you've ever taken Mucinex, that's an expectorant, that's what this is going to do. It's going to help get that mucus out of your airway. So aside from this mucus and the ciliary clearance, we also have interferon. What's interferon protective against? What type of infectious agent will this offer protection from? Anybody online know? What does interferon protect cells from?
Viruses?
Virus. There you go. You got it. Thank you. Perfect. Was that Russell?
Yes, that was me.
All right, great. Just wanted to check. Perfect. So if cells recognize viruses inside of them, they will secrete interferon, so then nearby cells will make antiviral proteins, those AVPs, so that they can prevent themselves from getting infected. So that's interferon, so viral protection. We can also have some antimicrobial defensins produced, so these peptides that are effective against bacteria, and then macrophages to phagocytose and destroy. We'll see later that doesn't always work, but they will phagocytose. Some pathogens can survive within these phagocytes, though. All right, so that's upper, and then they just kind of stopped talking about the lower respiratory tract, so I want to mention this. So in these alveoli, there's an alveolar fluid. That's going to contain immunoglobulins and macrophages. So that's in the lower respiratory tract. Upper respiratory tract, think mucociliary clearance. All right, so we know that smoking is bad. Smoking causes lung cancer. So whenever we look at the microbiome of smokers that we could say are healthy, right? So people who don't have something like emphysema, COPD, smokers with COPD and non-smokers. Do you see any trends here generally? Yeah, what do we see? Where?
In the healthy smoker versus non.
Well, so we have this patient here that has more than half proteobacteria. Almost all of person 4 is proteobacteria. So generally speaking, we see a lot of diversity is what I was going for here. Between people and between these groups, we see a lot of diversity. But as you mentioned, we see not a little, we're going to see a lot of proteobacteria, Pharyngitis, and Bacteroidetes. So these three groups are going to be found to be the predominating species in healthy or unhealthy smokers and non-smokers. Within those groups, there's a diverse arrangement, but we see a lot of the same bacteria. All right, so the pharynx has 3 parts. It's going to start in the back of the nasal cavity, go down into the back of the throat. So if you were to go like open your mouth and look, you see your uvula hanging down. Behind your uvula is a part of the pharynx, and then you go down to about here, and there's still another part of that pharynx. Any of that that's inflamed and infected, we can call pharyngitis. And the most common cause of this is Streptococcus pyogenes. This is strep throat. People usually get antibiotics to treat strep throat. And one complication is called scarlet fever. So I was reading, this is going to happen in maybe about 10% of kids who get strep throat. So you're going to get a rash, these erythrogenic exotoxins, so this is going to cause some redness in the skin. I spoke with a woman who had scarlet fever when she was a kid. She said that her fever was so bad, she was hallucinating. She was laying in bed seeing spiders that weren't there and things like that. So imagine how scary that would be as a kid. You're sick, and then you're hallucinating on top of that. So, you all know this. We're going to wash our hands. We're going to use hand sanitizer like crazy. This pandemic is great for hygiene, right? We're building nice hygiene practices. So strep throat, scarlet fever, both caused by strep pyogenes. We can treat that with penicillin. antibiotic. Let's go back to chapter 1. Who discovered penicillin? On it, Alexander Fleming. All right, so if strep throat turns into scarlet fever, and scarlet fever isn't dealt with antibiotics, that can turn into rheumatic fever. So again, this is caused by strep pyogenes. That can develop into what's called rheumatic heart disease, where you have scarring of the valves in the heart. So that's going to affect your ability to pump blood through your body as you should. So, again, thinking about maybe not quiz 4 questions, but exam 2 questions. Strep pyogenes is associated with strep throat, so streptococcal pharyngitis, scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, and rheumatic heart disease.
Can you say what rheumatic heart disease does again one more time?
Yeah, so that is going to be where you have scarring of the valves in the heart. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 heart valves.
And there's 0 way to treat it.
The book doesn't describe any of that, so I'm not sure of how you would treat that, honestly. Once cardiac tissue's been scarred, I think you'd have to do surgery, and open heart surgery is really dangerous. But is it more dangerous than having rheumatic heart disease? I don't know. All right, so here's the organism that we talked about earlier, just mentioned, the Corinium bacterium diphtheriae. This is going to cause diphtheria. So this is a local infection, meaning it's going to stay in the upper respiratory tract. It's not going to go systemic and spread to the whole body. And you can see here in this image, we get this pseudomembrane. So it's kind of like a membrane, where you get a bunch of dead cells, mucus, white blood cells, and fibrous material. Why would white blood cells be there? What's a white blood cell do?
Helps fight infection.
That's right, it's going to help fight infection. So if there's an infectious agent present, you should expect to see white blood cells, macrophages, neutrophils, dendritic cells. So diphtheria, as with most of these pathogens today, diseases, the pathogen is spread by respiratory droplet transmission. You know, I'd be really interested to see if most of these respiratory diseases have declined through the pandemic since people are taking these countermeasures, washing their hands and using face masks. It'd be interesting to see if other diseases are less common. All right, we've all probably dealt with a sinus infection at one point. Very uncomfortable. We have 4 sinuses, so to speak. You got one up here in your forehead. You have some kind of in the middle of your eyes, one a little bit further back, and then you've got 2 right here in your cheeks, in the maxilla. So if these become inflamed, we'd call that sinusitis, and it can be acute or chronic. The treatment's going to be the same for both. You need to get whatever that agent is out of your sinuses. You all have heard of neti pot? Yeah, those sinus rinses. And then we have some ear infections. Why are ear infections involved in this respiratory chapter? What's the connection between the ears and the respiratory system? It's called the eustachian tube. Okay, so that is shown right here. So have you ever been on an airplane or underwater and you hold your nose and then breathe out and you have pressure released from your ears? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah? So that pressure is being released through the eustachian tube. That's going to go into the nasopharynx and help release pressure from the middle ear. All right, so if you have an outer ear infection, you see the redness here, that is otitis externa. This is commonly known as swimmer's ear, so you can get pseudomonas from like a swimming pool. It can form a biofilm and cause an outer ear infection. It'll be red, swollen, uncomfortable. And then if your middle ear is infected, we'll call that otitis media, and that can be acute or chronic. And so that's why you see this word here, bulging on the eardrum, a middle ear infection. If you were to look inside, you'd see a red, bulging eardrum. Rhinoviruses, these are the most common cause of the cold. This is going to be in the upper respiratory tract. So touching fomites, touching people, breathing in their respiratory droplets, all ways this is transmitted. It's an RNA virus, and it's really small. It only has 10 genes in it. And so people with a cold, they can take antihistamines like Benadryl, and so that'll reduce the symptoms, but it doesn't make the illness go away any faster. And so if we take a look at this figure here, we can see that we have two seasonal spikes. So we have springtime and then early fall when rhinovirus is going to come up. There's a lot of diversity, which makes developing a vaccine really difficult. So if there's 100 strains, you need to find what all those have in common in order to have one vaccine, a single vaccine, for example. All right, I think this is probably the worst image that we have to see today. And so this is a young boy who has pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough. This is caused by a bacterium called Bordetella pertussis. What is the vaccine against pertussis? You remember? DTaP? Okay. So the DT, so we have diphtheria, is it tetanus? And then AP. The A, what is the word for it? Give me 1 second. This is worth me checking in the book for. Attenuated. Attenuated pertussis is the AP in DTaP. So again, this is our, you shot it in the foot way, so you have the whole bacterium, but it's somewhat inactivated. We call that attenuated. But it's still there. So the toxin is going to paralyze the ciliated cells. So that's going to make getting this organism out of the respiratory tract really difficult. And then as we make vaccines, the virus evolves, and this is going to keep going. Coevolutionary process. Do I have more on this? Yes, I do. All right, so early pertussis, you pick up this pathogen from the environment. It's going to be most contagious early on, in the first couple weeks. In the following couple weeks, this is when you're going to see your strongest symptoms. So this whooping cough is going to come in after a couple weeks. So this is where people who are infected, they're going to have this huge exasperated cough. It says a series of these rapid-fire exhalation coughs, followed by a really deep inhale, but because the airway is inflamed, it causes this kind of whooping sound as you inhale, like a kind of sound. Hence the name whooping cough. And then stage 3 is when it goes into its decline phase, so convalescence as we go back to health. And so that's why this is referred to as the 100-day cough. They don't explicitly state it, but the way that I understand this is if you don't get treatment, then it will be eradicated by your immune system in about 100 days. Have you all dealt with anybody with pertussis? Yeah? Does it go away? It will? Yeah. Okay. Can you give antibiotics for it?
I don't know anything, but
Okay.
I think my mom like or something. So,
But so you healed from it without major complication? Oh, okay. Good to know. All right, so we've written a paper on viruses. So we should be somewhat familiar with viruses. We had one chapter on it. So influenza, we see this every year. And so there have been several pandemics in the last several hundred years. And so what was a recent strain that caused an outbreak or an epidemic? H1N1, remember that? So the H and the N, those stand for the spike proteins. I forget what the number was. I think it's 17 of the H and 11 of the N. And so the H, the hemagglutinin, this is going to allow the virus to attach and get in to host cells. Remember, in order to cause a disease, the infectious agent has to attach and get into a cell. So it'll get in, it'll replicate, and then it has to get out to go infect either another cell or another individual. And it's going to do that through its N, or the neuraminidase spike protein, N. So this helps it get out. H, get in, N, get out. All right, so influenza A and B going to come back every year. A is going to be the most common, B is going to be less common. Influenza C is going to be less harmful. People with flu, so they're going to have lack of energy, fever, and they can develop pneumonia or secondary, some sort of opportunistic infection. This Guillain-Barré syndrome, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, maybe not. So this is where you have the influenza virus, so an infection, but your immune system targets your own cells instead of the influenza virus. They don't go on to explain what the symptoms are, so that is less important, just to introduce you to it though. Don't expect that to be a test question. And then Rye syndrome, we mentioned earlier, so if children have influenza and their caretakers give them aspirin, they can mount some sort of a response to aspirin. Again, because aspirin contains salicylates. Questions so far? Anything? Feeling okay? How's this material? Yeah, not too bad? All right. we're going to talk about tuberculosis for a minute. Do y'all remember if mycobacteria are gram-positive, gram-negative, or neither? Neither, right there, acid-fast positive. So tuberculosis here in the United States isn't too big of an issue, but globally, it is a big problem. About a third of the world is infected with tuberculosis right now. And so this is caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So people who get this infectious agent, this bacterium, inside their respiratory system, 90% don't develop tuberculosis, the disease, but they have the pathogen. All right, and then, let's see, I think it's on this next one, there we go. I'm going to start here and then move back a slide. So, with tuberculosis, you get a primary TB infection. You breathe in these bacterial cells. Then, only 10% of those people will develop a primary active TB disease. There's a figure in your book that shows all this. So, 10% have active disease. The other 90% have a latent disease. So they form these tubercles, but no active disease takes place. So you call that latent. And then later in life, let's say somebody has some sort of immunocompromisation. They become pregnant. They get old. They take steroids. Then TB can come back. But that's only going to be 10% of the 90%. So most people who get TB in their bodies don't develop the disease. So this bacterium is going to get deep into the lower respiratory tract. You're going to mount an immune response against it, and some of these cells can die, so you might end up coughing up some blood. You'll see kind of like a rusty or like a reddish color in your sputum that comes up. So you get the bacterium deep in your lung, your macrophages recognize it, they engulf it by phagocytosis, but they're unable to kill the bacterium, so it's going to survive in the cells that ate it. So then, since it stays alive, macrophages send out cytokines, and they recruit more macrophages. So we just have this huge inflammatory response, and that is going to end up forming what's called a tubercle. So this is a local infection, but that tubercle can rupture, and then these bacteria can spread to the whole body. And we would call that a systemic disease.
So it's a local infection, but it's already little ruptures and it turns into a systemic.
Correct. And the systemic form we call miliary tuberculosis. And so this can go and cause tubercles in the other internal organs. I don't recall which organs, but I assume the liver would be one of them. The liver is going to receive the most blood of all the organs. And then we talked about this, the Mantoux test can be used. Do you all remember if this is a humoral or cell-mediated test? This is cell-mediated. Good job. So if somebody has been exposed to tuberculosis, you put a little bit of the protein under their skin. If they've been exposed, they'll mount a quick reaction to it. So tuberculosis, it infects, like I said, a third of the world's population. We have these drugs that we can use to fight it, and this organism is really good at adapting to those. So we can have multi-drug resistant strains. You can form these drug cocktails that don't do anything to certain strains of mycobacteria. I believe rifampin is one of them, and fluoroquinolones. And so, all right, we take these drug cocktails, certain organisms develop resistance to it, so we develop more drugs. And then we can end up with strains like this extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis, where we don't know anything that'll kill it. We don't know any more drugs that are effective against this organism. We've tried them all, and it has evolved resistance. And if we develop a new drug, you bet it's probably going to develop resistance to that too. So let's just imagine if you don't have an acquired immune system, you're pretty much done from TB. So people with AIDS need to be really careful that they don't get TB infections. But let's say you have it early in life, and then you get AIDS later in life, you can have a secondary TB infection that can do you in, kill you. It's pretty interesting. We can take mycobacteria from a cow. So this strain called Mycobacterium bovis. So it's mycobacteria, it's the same genus. So it's going to contain some of the same proteins that tuberculosis has. You can attenuate it and give somebody a vaccine, so then they'll recognize mycobacteria without having tuberculosis. I'm not sure how useful this is or how effective this is, but this is one way that we can do this. A little side note, leprosy is also caused by mycobacteria. And one of my advisors did a little history project where he looked at people who had leprosy, people who had tuberculosis, and it seems that there is some sort of cross-immunity between them. So if you had TB, you probably didn't get leprosy. If you had leprosy, you probably didn't get tuberculosis because they're both mycobacteria. So conceptually, it's the same thing as this vaccine. Recognize something similar. Bacillus anthracis is going to be the causal agent of inhalation anthrax. This was used a couple decades ago in a bioterrorism effort. It can also come from people who work with wool. So this can be found in the wool of, I believe, sheep. And if you're working with this, you can breathe in these spores and develop anthrax. So you're going to get some cold symptoms, so runny nose, a little bit of a fever. You can get breathing problems, and if you don't get antibiotics, you're probably going to die from anthrax. And I really like how the book shows these microscopic images of all these pathogens. I think this is really helpful. Most pneumonia is going to be caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae. Again, by contact with people or fomites or breathing in respiratory droplets. And so we can have healthcare-acquired pneumonia or community-acquired pneumonia, depending on where you're picking up the infection. So those of you who work in a hospital, moving forward, after the pandemic, do you all know if you're expected to wear face masks in a hospital setting from now on? Have they mentioned any of that, like a plan moving forward post-pandemic for you all? You don't work in a hospital? No, they haven't mentioned anything? Okay.
Where I work, we are going to be required to wear face masks from now on.
Just moving forward, this is how the world works, kind of like how airports have changed?
Yep.
Wow, all right, glad I asked.
I know a lot of hospitals in California have already been transitioning to wearing masks when interacting with patients.
Yeah.
Like before the pandemic anyway, so I think that that's probably at least just now.
Yeah. I would expect that. I would also expect that in like research labs because, you know, I've worked with bacteria and I know how easy it is to contaminate your cultures. wearing a face mask is kind of like wearing gloves in a research environment. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a whole lot more face masks even after pandemic. All right, really small organism called Mycoplasma pneumoniae. This can cause what's called walking pneumonia. And clinically, if you were to take a sample, you'd see these, what they call little fried egg colonies. Legionnaire's disease is caused by Legionella pneumophila. This P should be lowercase. So again, this is airborne. It can cause necrotizing pneumonia. So that's where you have necrosis or tissue death alongside pneumonia. And then again, some influenza-like symptoms. So runny nose, malaise, probably fever. All right, now we're going to look at a few intracellular parasites. Do you all remember one type of bacteria that is obligately intracellular? One genus? Chlamydia. Chlamydia is very small and has to be intracellular. This Coxiella burnetii is going to cause Q fever. I had never heard about that until recently. And so this is picked up by consuming improperly treated milk. So if you drink raw milk that hasn't been pasteurized, you can pick up this Q fever. Symptoms, I don't recall. Again, not the most important thing for you, but we're introducing it. Ornithosis, so O-R-N, orna refers to birds. This is a bird disease, but humans can also get it. Chlamydia psittaci. I've tried to pronounce this plenty of times, and that's the best I can get for you. You're going to get scattered lung infections, fever, and cough. And then we can also end up with a chlamydial pneumonia caused by Chlamydia pneumoniae. We also think that this organism might play a role in heart disease, atherosclerosis. So if it leaves the lungs and gets in the arteries, it can cause some inflammation there too. The respiratory syncytial virus. So this is going to get into the bronchi and the alveoli, and it causes the cells to fuse together, and the fusion of cells forms what's called syncytia, hence the name respiratory syncytial disease. It makes the cells in your alveoli fuse. And then we can have some para-influenza infections. So this is going to be similar. So para is kind of like alongside, similar to influenza infection. So you can have some pneumonia, so fluid buildup in the lungs, and bronchitis. Where are the bronchi? Somebody remind me. In the lungs, they're going to branch off the trachea and go into the lungs. They're the tubes that enter the right and the left lung, the bronchi. Mid-pandemic, we all know about SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. This is a coronavirus, and we know that bats are the natural host here. Hantaviruses, we now call sin nombre. I believe that means without a name. Yeah? Anybody speak Spanish? Sin, without?
You are correct.
All right. So people are going to have, let's say that they live in more of a rural setting. So you can have a deer mouse, and it will shed its virus in urine, saliva, feces. You know, if you're working in like a barn, you might be exposed to something like this. You see mice everywhere, mice and rats. And so you're going to have fatigue, so low energy, headache, fever, muscle aches, common symptoms of fighting off an infection. And some people will get dizzy, low blood pressure, and difficulty breathing. No vaccine for it. All right, we have just a couple fungal pathogens we're going to talk about. Again, these are not really, really important things to study for exam 2 because we skipped the fungal chapter. But you all might see this, so let's just introduce it. All right, we got a typo here. Not the Wummer flu, that should be the summer flu. Wummer sounds funny though. So histoplasmosis. So if you're working in chicken coops, going through a bat cave, you can get this from these organisms. I assume it's in their feces. And so this is really dangerous for people who are immunocompromised. Coccidioid mycosis. Valley fever or desert fever, chest pain, a lot of fever, and people can end up with an infection of the spinal cord. That's a part of the central nervous system. Spinal cord is connected to the brain. They're continuous. And then the meninges are the protective layer around the central nervous system. So they're going to surround the brain and the spinal cord. You don't want an infection there. Don't worry about this life cycle. Don't even look at it. So if you get this and recover from it, you're immune for life. Certain immunocompromised people can get cryptococcosis. Again, from pigeon droppings, urban soil. And if it gets in the blood, it can cause systemic disease. Again, you don't want that. And so once this gets in our body, it can form this capsule on the outside. So this is different from a biofilm. A capsule belongs to an individual cell. Those can fuse to form a biofilm. But this capsule makes it hard for macrophages to eat them by phagocytosis. And you can see the capsule here. So the capsule is going to make it hard to recognize the bacterium. We can have pneumocystic pneumonia. You all have heard of aspergillus? No? Aspergillus is a mold that can cause pneumonia. And if it grows and forms a mass deep in the lungs, that might have to be surgically removed. And we would call that an aspergilloma, a mass of aspergillus. So it can stay in the lungs, or it can be invasive and spread through the whole body. And then the very last thing for today, if you have a fungal infection and it secretes a toxin, we're going to call that a mycotoxin. So today was kind of a blast of infections for you. Again, exam 2, don't worry so much about these mycolic infections, these fungal infections, because we skipped the fungal chapter. I really do want you to pay attention to the streptococcal diseases that we talked about today, though. And we will review tomorrow morning. So let's end this. So tomorrow, what you all should expect is a review over this stuff. We will cover, let's plan on covering chapter 21. If I decide to change and do chapter 23, I'll email you all around maybe 7 o'clock tonight. But again, plan on doing 21. I'm going to look into MLK Day on Monday. Let's plan on not meeting Monday. I'll address that in the same email that I send you all. And we'll take quiz 4 tomorrow. I'm going to grade your papers over the weekend. Tuesday is our exam 2 review. Wednesday is the makeup exam. You can do it if you want. It's not required to replace exam 1 score. Exam 2 is going to be on Thursday, and we're done. So I want to ask you all, how do you feel? I feel like you all have learned a lot. Do you feel like you have? Because the point of this class, you're supposed to come out of this saying, I know something about microbiology. And I feel like you all do. And that's really powerful. So just be proud of yourselves as you're feeling like you're struggling. You really recognize how much work you put in and how much you've learned, how much you've gotten out of this. Okay? It's worth it, I promise. People online, do you have any questions? Anything?
I need to talk to you later.
Okay, cool. Do you want to do that like in the next 5-10 minutes, or do you want to do that later by email?
It would probably be easier to like actually talk to you because I have a lot of questions.
Okay, cool. So what I'll do is I'll just stay in here, honestly. So once everybody says I don't have any questions, then you and I can just stay in here and talk. How's that sound?
Perfect.
Cool.
I have a question. You might have already said it though.
I'm sorry, what's that?
We have class on Monday, or do we not, since it's Martin Luther King?
Right, so someone had brought that up. If it is a holiday, which I believe you all that it's MLK Day, then the university should be closed. And so you can expect an email about that to come later this evening. I'm going to go teach after this until 6 o'clock tonight. So I won't be able to check my email until later.
Okay.
But if it's MLK Day, we won't have class.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have my nursing orientation from 8 to 3:30 tomorrow,
Cool.
so I won't be able to take the quiz during class.
Okay. Let's see. Since I've got all these things running right now, we can email with that because I'm going to make the quiz tonight. And then whenever I make it, I will give you special access for a time.
Okay, if I can just take it at like 4, I'll be able to take it then.
If you want to do it afterwards, I'll see you at 4:30, then 5. I don't want you to be running around and then do more because you just like have to do it and free. You know what I mean? So just think about it.
Okay.
And then when you email me, reminding me to say, so you're going to get a half hour. Will you please set my exam to start at 4:30, whatever you want.
Okay.
Okay. First time I noticed that too.
Oh, behind my ear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of people don't know.
Cool. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye. You're welcome. You got it.
So we have all these pieces, so it would be just worth it to study all of these things. Big time, pretty much gonna be everything that we talked about.
Yeah, because I mean, it's multiple choice stuff, and so it's organized here really well. So here's like strep pathogens. Strep.
You have a good one.
Strep. You too. Thanks. So, right. So I guess with most of this stuff, it might be like, is this a viral or bacterial disease? Is it upper or lower respiratory tract? Again, that one you should expect to see tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but for the exam, the strep pathogens causing strep throat, scarlet fever, rheumatoid fever, and rheumatoid heart disease. So things like that, where you have 4 options, 1 pathogen. You should know that. Okay. Yeah. Maybe things that are associated with biofilms, but no, these are great study tools. Okay. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna try and keep up with all this reading stuff, because it's a lot to go through.
Oh, I know. It is a lot. But you feel like you're able to hang in?
Yeah, I mean, I use it a lot of this stuff, especially the lab things that we do, because, like, I work at a vet clinic, and I'm all the time doing stuff like blood samples and stuff like that, interfusing.
Okay, cool.
I look at a lot of stuff under a microscope, and I read, like, fecal samples and stuff like that. So, like, a lot of stuff is very applicable to what I'm doing.
Yeah, definitely. And so you want to be a vet, that's right? You want trying to go to vet school?
Yep.
Okay.
The goal.
You got somebody in your family who's doing that?
No, I grew up on a farm,
Okay.
and I've just always been fascinated with animals,
Yeah.
everything that they do.
Cool.
And I decided when I was in high school, that's just something I wanted to do.
What kind of a farm?
Like
Vegetable, vegetable, livestock, what?
I was livestock,
Okay.
just cattle.
Yeah, cool. I got some friends who are dairy farmers. It's a hard life.
Yeah, we don't do dairy, we just raise them for beef, yeah.
Yeah. Even still, man, you gotta take care of those cows. Move them every day.
A lot.
Yeah. Are you from Kentucky?
Yeah,
Okay, what part?
Litchfield.
Okay, cool.
You know about that?
No, I don't.
You ever heard of, Rough River Lake or something like that's the county?
Okay, cool. All right, I'm gonna talk to Sabrina and then just shoot me an email if you need anything, all right?
I live in Litchfield.
Okay. You too. All right.
I heard him talking about Litchfield. That's where I live.
Oh, cool. All right, so I'm the only one in here, so I can take this off. Okay, what's up?
So she emailed me back. She
Who's she?
Dr.
Oh, Lynn.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
She we're still recording. You wanna